the Happy Scientist podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happy scientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello, this is not Nick Oswald welcoming you to this Bitesize Bio webinar, but Tom Warwick, content creator here at Bitesize Bio. Today we have a live episode of the Happy Scientist podcast. If you want to become a happier, healthier, and more productive scientist, you're in the right place. With me, as always, is Bitesize Bio team's Mr. Miyagi, Mr. Kenneth Vogt. In these sessions, we hear from Ken mostly on principles that will help shape you for a happier and more successful career. Along the way, I'll pitch in with points from my personal experience as a scientist. If you have any questions for Ken, please put them into the questions box at the side of your screen, and I'll put them to Ken at the end of the show. Today, we'll be discussing urgency and how to keep it from ruining your day, your project, and your career. So over to you, Ken.
All right. Nice to be with you again, Tom.
Yeah, likewise.
It was funny. I was thinking about you when this topic came up, and I thought, this would be a good one to have Tom on. And just so happened that Nick was not available at the recording time, and here you are.
Yeah, I am. It's magically sure. I'm like a genie.
So everything works out. It's funny. We have a project management system that we use here. Yeah, and it's great. It keeps things on track. There are a lot of moving parts. There's a number of people involved. But every once in a while, somebody, namely me, doesn't do a task on time. So I think I actually told Tom the questions I want to make sure we answer for this session on the weekend. And we're recording on a Monday. So I created a little urgency perhaps for Tom.
Sorry, Ken, I'm fantastically prepared. I've got all my notes.
There we go. So it all works out. But that is what happens sometimes. It's nobody's trying to do it. It's not happening on purpose. Nobody's creating drama. It's just things happen. And of course, things can happen that'll still ruin everything. So we can't just look at it and go, oh, well, what can we do? Well, we need to figure out what we can do, because sometimes we just have to deal with it. There are times when you'll just suffer it. Like, you suck it up and you'll pull that all-nighter or whatever it is you got to do. You'll push things that are also important to you, but sometimes it's the end of the world, and so you gotta ask yourself, what am I gonna do? So I go to my first slide here, and the question is, what is urgency? Kind of the first blush, that seems, well, that's an obvious question. Maybe not. So I'll actually put that question to you, Tom. What do you think urgency is?
I think a task that you're dependent on to get done, that will have negative consequences for other people who are reliant upon that task further down the road, I would say.
Got it. Yeah, I would agree with that take on it. I'm gonna put some definitions out there that may be helpful for people to think about. Urgency is the application of time to an objective. Now, just that, there's two factors. There's some object that you want to get done, and then there's the impact of time on that objective. So just the cold hard facts of that can create urgency. But what makes it really interesting for us humans is when you add emotion. Because now it's like, this has to get done. And then it's more like, oh my God, this has to get done. Or it's going to be the end of the world if it doesn't get done. Or somebody's going to be really ticked off if it doesn't get done. Or somebody's going to be really they're going to have huge problems if this doesn't get done. All that stuff are factors in urgency. And our call it our emotional reaction to urgency really does matter. And you might look at yourself and think, I'm a full of analysis. I'm a clinician. I don't worry about that stuff. I'm like, don't kid yourself. You do. And even if you don't, other people do. And they will absolutely pour their emergency on you. And, you know, and you're still going to have to deal with it. You still have to face it. So it's good to recognize when there's urgency present, because it will start to impact the decisions you make. And we've talked in the past on the podcast about urgency versus importance, and they're not the same thing. There are things that are important but not urgent. There are definitely things that are urgent but not important. And we've all had somebody that just busts into our office like, "Oh my God, we got to do this," and of course you leap to it because this person is showing emotion about it, and then after a while, sometimes we realize as we're halfway into it, like, this is so unimportant. Why are we bothering to be distracted by this? So that is a factor in dealing with urgency, and I'm not so much going to deal with that matrix of urgency versus importance today. I want to specifically key on urgency and what happens, and it's a natural thing to have in any work environment. There are going to be times when things are urgent, and people have different opinions about what's urgent and what isn't. And we're going to deal with that in a little bit, but just for right now, just to recognize what is urgent and when it happens. If we go into a realm where we never respond to urgency, you're going to find people don't like working with you. That they care that when they think something has to happen now, that you are paying attention to them. Obviously people aren't always right, and sometimes people have no authority over you, so even if they are right, they can't force you. But how well will you fit into the system? Will you respond to urgency in an appropriate way? Not just appropriate for you, but appropriate for your team, appropriate for your lab, for your company, your university, or whatever it is, for whatever your objectives are. And your objectives can define what is relevant when it comes to urgency. And you can decide from there. When you stub your toe, that's urgent, right? It hurts. Is it urgent that you rearrange all the furniture so this never happens again right now? Probably not. But then again, if it's the 10th time you stubbed your toe on that, maybe it is about time you did what needs to be done. Then that urgency is a flag to clue you in on where you should go next. So the first task there is determining, is this or is this not urgent? Once you make that determination, okay, what is the appropriate response to urgency? So again, I will I will put you on the hot seat here, Tom, and say, what do you think? What is an appropriate response to urgency?
Well, you mentioned pouring emotion on someone further down the line in the series of tasks. That definitely isn't it definitely isn't an appropriate response. I guess it depends on the task in hand and how urgent you view it is, because one option is to stop what you're doing and get it done.
Right.
But then you need to speak to the people or persons who've made something urgent and explain how that has impacted you and your other stuff that they might not be aware of.
Sure.
So case dependent, I guess, but definitely not emotional.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely case dependent, and we shouldn't inappropriately use emotion, but emotion isn't necessarily bad. Like, for instance, in a legitimate emergency, an emotional response is part of the biological mechanism to perhaps save your life. So emotion isn't the enemy. It's a tool that we can use. But recognizing first step when somebody presents something as urgent is to ask yourself, is this in fact an emergency? Because it just because somebody else is emotional doesn't mean that it is in fact an emergency. So we want to check that out. So now, once we're there and we've dealt with the emotional part, and I'm saying this is happening in split seconds in our head, but the next thing is to figure out, is whatever this person wants to do in response to the urgency, is it in alignment with our objectives? It's like, hey, there's been a change. The presentation has been moved up from Friday to Monday. Um, okay, we want this presentation to go well. It's really important. That lines up. Okay. The other thing that we want to look at is, does this urgent situation and our response to it align with our values? So there are some things that you're just not willing to do. Some things that, like, no, that we're not going to do that. That's just wrong, and I don't necessarily mean wrong morally. Maybe it's wrong from just a factual standpoint. Like, that's just not going to get us closer to our goals. But we can look at these things and from those two different viewpoints. There's our what have already been established as our objectives, and will responding to this urgent problem help get us closer to that? And then for yourself and for your career, you do want to pay attention to your own values. I mean, there are the general values of the group you're in or the lab you're in, but you have your own values too. There's some things that you will personally consider just to be a bridge too far, and you're not willing to do. And I don't want to bring up any hot button issues, because I'm not even in a position to choose sides on that. But there are some things that people have been willing to do in silence in the past that are no longer considered ethically viable, right? And then there are some things that maybe it's just you, like, it's just not a place I want to go. I don't want to do that. And if you're finding that somebody is jumping you with urgency about something, you know, you don't want to sell out your own values to get that done. Some people will, it can be a, you know, an ethical kind of situation that isn't even about science, just could be about people relations, about social relations. Somebody is wanting you to do something that is going to have a negative impact on somebody else in your environment, on your team, whatever, and you're just not willing to do that. Um, and maybe they got a good reason why they want that. Like, maybe they're trying to cut some red tape. They want to get something done. That other person's going to have a problem with this. Oh well, they'll get over it. You know, those are positions people take, and it does impact what is appropriate for you to do in response. Now, maybe you got to come up with a hybrid. How do I respond to what this person who is demanding urgency wants, and also get what I want? Because often we look at situations, we think they're binary. That's either they get their way or I get my way. We're like, come on, that's not true. There's often there's often opportunities to get what both of you want, or at least to get most of what both of you want. And then you can weight how much they should get versus how much I should get. The other side of this question is, when is it not appropriate to respond to an urgency? Which I noticed that was the first thing you started with when I asked about what is appropriate. Well, there's stuff that isn't appropriate. That's true. There certainly is. And the first thing is, just because they're acting like it's an emergency doesn't mean it is. And maybe the appropriate response for you right now is to calm them down, or to fill them in with facts that they may not be aware of. Maybe their response is entirely appropriate based on their limited data. You give them more, and now they're okay. Now they realize, okay, it's not as urgent as I thought. And we've all had that happen. Like, we got to get this done by Friday, and holy cow! Like, don't worry, so and so is going to be taking care of 90% of that tomorrow, and so we don't really have that much on our plate. It's like, oh, okay, well then we're good. The other thing is when you find things that are really out of alignment, um, and I want to key on the difference between something that is unaligned and something that is non-aligned. That is, there are things that they go against alignment with your objectives, right? And then there are other things that are just not related to your objective. They're not aligned because they're just not involved. And so you don't necessarily have to take up an adversarial position. It's just like that doesn't matter. So don't worry about it. um, and again, this comes down sometimes just to social interaction and the relationship we have with the people that are bringing urgency to us. Now, sometimes, of course, the person bringing the urgency is you. It's your own, it's happening in your own head. You're having a conversation with yourself, right? Oh my God, I got to get this done. I'm I'm so screwed if I don't get this done. Some of that self talk is generating urgency without even looking at what your values are, without even looking at what your objectives are, without being rational about it. And I know that can be a hard thing for a scientist to accept. Like, how dare you imply that I could ever be not rational? it's it's core to my job, and it is core to your job. However, it's not mutually exclusive from being a human. So we're going to have our moments. So I will pause for a second here, and ask you, Tom, if there's anything you want to feed in here.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people listening, they'll be curious to know what to do when it's someone in a position of power, when there's a really steep power gradient putting stuff on you. I'm thinking lab supervisors. Do you have any comments on how people could deal with that?
Well, funny you should bring that up. This is exactly what I was thinking about here. Like, who defines what's urgent anyway? It's like you say, when the boss comes to you and they say it's urgent, and you may not be in a position to say, "Oh, it's really not, though." So, I mean, we do have to look at appropriate hierarchy, and sometimes we are not as clued in as we might think. We might think it's not that important, but um, that person who is up the chain may have information we don't have, and may have objectives that aren't totally on our plate. It's not maybe that they aren't sharing those objectives with you, but they don't really matter to you that much. If your job is to do the work in the lab, right? If you're in that role, right? And their job is to make sure you stay funded, and their job is to make sure that the the resourcing is handled and the right staff is on it. And yeah, it's not like somebody who is more we're doing the line work is unaware of those things, but it isn't their job to work it out. So that other person has that job. So when they come to you and they tell you that something is urgent, and you're like, yeah, it's not urgent to me. um, it's not just about you. Sometimes we respond to other people's urgency because it matters to them. Um, there is, of course, there are people that their urgencies are just ridiculous, or that just never stop. They just run from one emergency to the next, and they generate emergencies. Sometimes they generate them all in their own head, but sometimes they actually create problems, and and we do have to respond to them as urgent, just because there they are, and there's nothing we can do. Um, we need to recognize that is part of the environment, though. We are never going to perfectly align with other people. We're never going to perfectly align with even our boss, even if we have a great boss, even if we just love our lab manager, we love our PI. What Sometimes we're just not going to be on the same page, and sometimes that means that we have to we got to play on the team. There are trade-offs here, and maybe it's not one to one. Maybe it's just, this time I'm going to do what you want because you want it, and later I'll get some benefit from that.
And some
But
people
I'm not going to worry about drawing a line straight from one to the other.
Sorry,
Go
Ken,
ahead,
just
Tom.
to jump in. Some people thrive on urgency as well. I think it's important to recognize sometimes people, and this might be a boss or a supervisor, they're not organized people, and it's just how they work, and it's probably how they work at their best.
Yeah.
Recognizing that in people, and then adjusting your response accordingly, I think is important.
Yeah. When the more you can recognize somebody else's style, their core mindset about how things operate, the easier it is for you. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but if you can just understand it, like, okay, I see where this is coming from, and it makes it simpler for you. if you never bother to think about where are they coming from, it can just look random and crazy, and that makes it hard on you. When you are in a position to to negotiate, to ask for trade-offs, like, okay, I will do this for you, but hey, later on, could you do this for me? It's not a bad idea to look at what's on offer when somebody brings you with something urgent. It's an opportunity, actually.
Hmm.
At that moment, they're going to be a little more open because if they have a problem they consider to be urgent, they're going to be willing to do things to get that solved. Well, that might be the moment to ask for that help. Now, I'm not talking about doing this in a manipulative way, but it's about just timing things correctly. Sometimes you got something you did want to bring up, and I'm waiting for the right moment. Well, this might be the right moment. So make it work for everybody. You want a win-win situation, but responding to other people's urgency can open opportunities for you that you might not otherwise have. So why not? Urgency doesn't have to be bad. Is the bottom line. It can, as you just mentioned, it can be a personal motivator. Uh, what I'm talking about here is it can be just a way to make better use of your social interaction, and you can make it work for you. And if there was no urgency at all, ever, wouldn't you be bored? I mean, we are looking for excitement. We are looking for challenges. We are looking to solve problems. So, I mean, that's part of the whole game here. It's what we do. It's what you do as scientists. So, why not make it work for you? All right. Well, Tom, is there anything else you'd like to add at this point?
Well, we keep coming back to this removing, or it can be emotional when people come to you with something and you don't feel you have got time to get it done, or it's not your job.
Mhm. Yeah.
Is there any practical advice you'd have to, what you can do to remove the emotion from your response? Because I think I'm quite a hothead. I think people ask me and the red mist descends a little bit. Yeah. So what advice would you give me as
Well,
someone who would just see red?
yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is that I don't entirely accept the premise of the question.
Okay.
Some emotional response is fine. It's maybe it's just certain kinds of emotional responses are the ones you wanna do away with. So uh, I love that analogy of the red mist. If it's just mist, it's fine. But if it turns red, okay, this is a problem. And so at that moment, it's it's pause and reflect. The idea when we have two things that we can do whenever we're confronted. We can just respond immediately, or we can pause and determine what our reply will be. And in the moment when our every system is telling us to lash back, that pause is where all the strength is. Because we won't necessarily automatically make the right judgment in that moment. If we will just take a moment and go, you know what, hang on. Let me look at my calendar. Yeah, and it's fine to give a reason why you're not responding just yet. I need to check my calendar. I need to talk to Cynthia. I need to finish this task I'm handling right now, but my full attention right is on when I'm done. Give yourself that chance to pause, and it all works out fine. Yeah, then you're going to make better choices, and that person will calm down too, because in that pause they get to ponder for a moment too. And sometimes people won't accept that, like, no, I have to have this right now. Well, now you got a clear picture. Okay, they're really in a bad spot, and whether their urgency is caused by a problem they created or one that was impressed upon them. It, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter at that moment. What matters right now is that it really, really is bothering them, and that's the thing you're wanting to respond to now more than perhaps the problem itself. It's like, how can I be supportive of this person right now? Now, sometimes you don't want to be supportive. It's like, this is, I can't believe I took this job to work for this jerk, and he's once again being a jerk. And we forget that that's a human being too, who's having their own problems and pressures. And that's not to excuse bad behavior on the part of anyone, but to just see like, all right, I see what's going on right now. And again, even if that that breath you take is literally just a breath, that a split second, it can be enough to keep you from doing something you will regret.
Yeah,
From
I think a
saying,
lot of people, they transfer their urgency as well, right? That
oh yeah,
your boss or someone you work with, they're rushed around for something that's not directly related to you, and then they
yeah,
transfer
exactly.
that urgency on you, and it might not be your problem, and it kind of becomes yours. And I guess it's up to you to decide what you take on. It depends on your relationship with that individual, but trying to recognize when it's just transferred urgency is
Yeah,
is
yeah. A word for that is
important too.
projection. So maybe they come to you and they tell you that it's urgent that you do X, when actually what they're worried about is Y, that has nothing to do with you, but they needed to push that urgency out somewhere,
Hmm.
and you just happened to be the first one they saw, and so you got the brunt of
So would
it.
you
It's
try
good
and
to
turn that
recognize.
back around? Sorry, Ken. Would you try and turn that back around on them? Would your advice be to let them know that that's what they're doing, or would you just suck it up the first few times?
Well, I guess it comes down to first, do you have the kind of relationship where you can say that? If you do, it's really great if you can nip it in the bud. But perhaps that you don't have that, or in the moment it doesn't feel like, I don't know if I have an opening here. But at that point, it may be best to deflect. Like, I'll look at that in a minute. And sometimes that's all they really needed right now. They just they just needed to know that somebody's paying attention. And you may well look at it in a minute and go, "Yep, it's still not urgent," and off you go, right? But if we just ignore people, if we act like, "Well, that was stupid," and you're stupid, well, nobody reacts well to that. So, and it is amazing to me too how often that kind of thing happens between really smart people. They're smart, they know they're smart, they know you're smart, and yet you're acting like they're stupid, and so that doesn't add up for anybody. It's like,
Doesn't get the
how much
most out of your relationship with them as well. Going back to urgency being an opportunity to get something you want. That's
yeah,
only if you're dealing well with each other emotionally and actually saying what you mean.
yeah. And I'll grant you that sometimes there are people that you just don't have that relationship with at this point. And whether it's because you've never developed it, or it's a new relationship, or there has there's been bad blood in the past, and so that's still hanging around. you know you don't want to ignore the fact that the relationship is not yet there. That's fine. But then what kicks in, well, what will have to kick in is professionalism. What would a professional do right now with this request? And you can operate from there. And what that will often happen there too is that'll take out the underlying, well, last time they really worked me over, and so they're probably doing that again this time. It'll remove that. It's just, okay, what would a professional do now? And just do what they would do. And you don't have to even make it, well, what I as a professional do now. Just what would any professional do now? And sometimes if you have somebody who around you who is a good example in this kind of area, go, what would Cynthia do now? What would Bob do now? And follow that. And it's not a bad idea to ask for help from a mentor, if you have such a thing in your lab, or in your work life, where you can call on them. This happened today, and I didn't know what to do, and see what they have to say. And you know, and when you can have that conversation later. It doesn't matter what you did. Maybe what you did, you really, well, that wasn't a great solution. Yeah, but what should I have done? And
It's,
just bank that for later.
it's a
We're
good
going to make
person.
mistakes.
So it's a good point you make. Having because sometimes things need to get done and you've got a limited amount of time. But if you've got someone who understands your situation, maybe is on a similar, wage or power level to you within whatever job you have, and
Hmm.
maybe when the legitimately urgent stuff comes in, if you develop that relationship enough, they will help you out. I certainly had a mentor like that when I was doing my PhD. Just because of the field we were in, protein purification, we were often working to deadlines, and it was easier for us to just take on a little bit of each other's job to help help us both out in the long run. And it was a fruitful relationship to
sanity
build.
check.
Yeah, it was a sanity check. It was within reason. It's like, could you just do this bit of work for me? I won't be around the lab, but if I do, it'll actually be hours out of my day to come to the lab. Could you just do this? Obviously, with the tacit agreement of reciprocation later down the line. So I think that's something people in the lab could actively work towards, and not working in isolation.
Yeah, it helps too to take these urgent moments and use them to build your social network, to build your team, to build your relationships that will pay off later. Maybe it'll pay off later next week, but maybe it'll pay off later in your career. Having made a good impression on a variety of people, you never know where they're going to end up in the future, or where you're going to end up in the future. And so these kind of things are investments. So it isn't always about, I will get this back later in this side of the horizon. Maybe the later will be on the other side of the horizon, and that's perfectly fine. And it's great to have some of that stuff banked up, because you never know when it's going to show up and really make a difference.
One thing as well that I noticed, and it's true of any job, but as you become more experienced, more becomes expected of you. And that leads directly to more being asked of you.
Right.
Because you can do more and you're capable of doing more, doesn't mean you've always got the time in your calendar to achieve it. And I guess this comes back to another point I wanted to make about workload management. And do you have any advice for when you are rushed off your feet? Are there some recommendations you have just for workload management when there are loads of legitimately urgent matters, all happening at once?
Well, I guess what happens, we go back to the first point we were talking about, is what aligns with your objectives and what aligns with your values. If you're fine, there could be a number of things that align with both your objectives and your values, and you just don't have time. I mean, there are human limits, right? So at that point, we got to kind of do triage. It's like, what really is critical here? And it may be that, I mean, as biologists, you're often working with living things. And you can't just say, well, I'm going to take care of 2 of the 3 things that are necessary to keep this sample alive. You have to take care of all 3, right? Well, that means you got to find another way. If it can't fit into your calendar, then you got to get some help. And you got to alert the boss to let them know, like, maybe it's not my job to solve this problem. I need to alert the boss that this problem exists and it's got to get solved, and I can't solve it. And some bosses hate for you to bring them problems without solutions, but the fact is they need to know about problems, even if you don't know the solution.
I often found when I was, doing extra work for people, all that it took for me to become okay with doing that is recognition. It's amazing how far recognition goes. So I'd also advise, if people are helping you out, do take the time, just to signal how that is a help.
Oh yeah, in 2 ways. Tell them, but also praise them in front of others, and especially others who's like their boss or other people of higher stature. That kind of thing really goes a long way.
I just wanted to bring it back to you mentioned our project management tool, and then we're also spoken a lot about urgency triggering an emotional response. It's funny, isn't it? Our overdue things are always in red. We should put them in blue or something, calming ocean colors. But even the people who designed this project management tool, they're aware on some unconscious level of urgent, red. And I don't know, it's funny to think about how deep that goes.
A lot of communications methods we use now, like Skype or Telegram or whatever, I found that the hang up button is usually in red. but I
Yeah.
am drawn to red. I can't tell you how many times I've hung up on people because it was red.
I can imagine that getting into a lot of trouble. That is pretty funny. Well, I don't know if any of the audience has any questions. Please feel free to put them, into the chat box if you do. I don't know if you've got any more questions for me, Ken, but that was all I wanted to ask for you in this session.
Here's a bare your soul kind of question. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where somebody came to you with something urgent and you just reacted wrong? You just wouldn't handle the problem that they wanted you to handle, and it came back around, and now you're like, oh man, I should have listened.
Oh, it's a good one. Not to the point where it's trashed a relationship or a project. At least nothing that jumps out as one of those things that haunts me, when I go to sleep. But I do find my barrier to what I would say is much, much lower, and I recognize that in myself. So, I'm chippier, I'm less productive, I become more problems focused than solution focused. Yeah. And in this job here, it's never one big thing, it's small things. Whereas if I was in a different job, perhaps that would be the case. There'd be fewer bigger things, and maybe my reaction would be proportionate.
Right.
What about you, Ken? What about you?
Well, I was thinking about what happened here, and I mentioned at the beginning. I did learn a lesson here. I did not handle the task of letting you know what the outline of our discussion was going to be until the last second. Like, it didn't turn out bad.
It didn't turn out bad.
I know you can handle it, but
I thought it was some meta challenge, Ken. I thought we're going a couple of levels deep, like Inception.
Well, I know that there are other people. If I did that with, it would not have turned out well. I got a warning. So I will not fail that warning again.
Well, I'm glad.
And it's good to look for that stuff. Like, okay, I dodged a bullet, but let's not have to dodge bullets in the future.
I promise to be nice. All right, Ken. On that positive note, we've not got any questions from our audience today. But yeah, unless you've got anything else, Ken, to add, I'll wrap us up.
Looks good.
Okay, yeah. So thank you, everybody. We've reached the end of our time, and thanks again, Ken, for your insight in these sessions as always, and thanks to everybody who took the time out of the day to tune in live today and on demand in the future. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to The Happy Scientist on your favorite podcast platform and the Bitesize Bio YouTube channel. You can listen back to our earlier episodes, which are packed with equally useful wisdom, and of course, tell your colleagues so we can help spread The Happy Scientist. Look out for more episodes in the coming months. You can find them on events.bitesizebio.com and the Happy Scientist Facebook page at www.facebook.com/The Happy Scientist. Until then, good luck in your research and goodbye from all of us at Bitesize Bio, including Mr. Miyagi.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.